Man, it's wintry, and I'm in a t-shirt. It's a good time as ever to talk about bass fishing with the Carolina rig. Everything you need to know to get started fishing the Carolina rig, including how to rig it. Let's check it out. So what are you going to need for your Carolina rig? First things first, you're going to need a weight. Now the weights are adaptable. I have a standard worm weight here. You can use a barrel style weight. You can use an egg style weight. The main thing with the weights are the backbone of the Carolina rig is getting this thing down on the bottom. The weights and the beads make all kinds of noise. They also kick up silt. So depending on the type of weight you use, that's going to dictate how much bottom drag you have. So a worm weight like this with the pointier end is going to do a little less disturbance on the bottom, but something that's really broad like an egg sinker is going to kick up a lot more filth and you're going to fill a lot more of that bottom. You're also going to need some beads. Now the beads are super adaptable as well. You can use plastic, you can use glass, you can use different colors, you can throw in tungsten barrels to make more sound. There's a lot you can do here. Plastic is usually the basic one that's used. The upside of the beads is you're going to get a little bit of sound, and it's also going to help protect your knot, which will make sense here in just a little bit. Now you're also going to need a barrel swivel. The barrel swivel is going to attach our main line to our leader. It's also going to allow free range of motion. Then you're going to need your worm hook of choice. Worm hooks, of course, use whatever your preference is. Use whatever size you need to your bait. Then you're going to need your lure of choice. We most commonly fish worms off of this, but you can fish big, you can fish small, you can fish creature baits, really whatever you want. Experiment with it. Now that you've got all of that, how do we put it together? For the sake of making everything super visual for you, I'm going to use these bright colored cords. We're going to pretend that the blue is our main line. And when we get there, we'll pretend that the green is our leader. So the first thing I do is I install a bead. That bead just goes onto the main line. I've never got too wrapped up in bead color, but you can experiment. After we've installed that first bead, then we're going to install our weight. So what we're looking at is bead, then weight. After I have my weight on, I put on another bead, like so. These beads clicking against the weight, etc., creates sound, which naturally entices the fish. This bottom bead is not only for the sound, it's also going to act as a buffer between your weight and your knot when we tie this to our barrel swivel. So the next thing we're going to install onto our main line is the barrel swivel. Now that we have our barrel swivel on there, you can see this bead helps to keep that weight from smashing into that knot all the time and weakening your knot. Now all of this hits together to make sound. Now from here, we're just going to attach our preferred leader to the other side of our barrel swivel. So you should have something like that. Now generally on my main line, I'm running braid, and then you can kind of pick and choose what you want to do on your leader. If you're a fluoro fisherman, you can use fluoro or whatever you want. Main thing to keep in mind is there's going to be a lot of bottom contact with this rig, so make sure to rig accordingly with things that can stand up to that sort of abrasion. Now, leader length, you can pick and choose. I generally run anywhere between 2 to 3 feet of leader coming off of my barrel swivel. From here, you're just going to tie on your hook. Once your hook's tied on, you'll just rig your plastic. And there we go. That's our Carolina rig ready to roll. So what's the deal with the Carolina rig? Carolina rig over something, say, like the Texas rig, gives a little bit more natural movement to that bait. So the weight on this rig is going to be planted down into the sediment on the body of water that you're fishing. But since you have the weight well separated from the worm, this worm has a little bit more room to move around. While you have this free movement, you have your weight plus your beads making a little bit of rattle sound up here. Now, as I previously mentioned, the type of weight that you use will dictate the type of disturbance that you create. It's also going to dictate how this thing fishes. Big, bulky, heavy weight's going to really stay planted down on the bottom, whereas a little bit lighter allows this to come up a little bit more. Weight shape is also going to dictate how much of a disturbance you make in the actual sediment. Bigger weight, of course, is going to produce more turbidity in the water. The best way to fish this is just to cast in fan patterns, working it into the side, just feeling it dragging along the bottom. If you want to get a little more movement into it, you can slightly jig it as well. I generally just kind of dead stick drag this, feeling that weight going across the bottom. Now, because you're making constant contact with the floor of the body of water that you're fishing, it can really tell you a lot about what you're fishing. You'll be able to tell if you're fishing in really loose soil or if it's a hard packed bottom. You're going to be able to feel if there's a bunch of rocks or cover in there because you're going to feel that weight making contact with things. That being said, I like to fish these with braid as my main line because I can feel every little contact that weight is making. I tend to use a 7-foot to a 7'6" rod so that I have plenty of rod to get nice long movements out of that worm before having to then take up my slack to readjust. Now, during warm water periods, I tend to fish the Carolina rig pretty regularly. About the only time that I step away from it is during the spawn, when I really want to target specific fish in spawning areas, or when fish are really gathered up into cover. I find that the Texas rig is a little better suited for that because the weight's right on the worm and you can be very precise with where you place that. But outside of that, I like to fish this pretty common. Once those fish pull away from those spawning areas and start to spread out a little bit, this type of soft plastic fishing really is like a search bait. You can cover so much water with this so quickly, it's kind of like the crankbaits of worm fishing. A second runner-up for me is wacky style. I love to fish worms wacky style. However, that's a much slower presentation. Whereas with this, we're going to cover a lot more water. This rig has stood the test of time for a reason because it flat out catches fish. Again, this is a little bit like a crankbait in that it's a really good way to search for fish. Once you start to track down some fish using this rig, then you can experiment a little bit more with what you're fishing to try to narrow in what they really want. Sometimes this is what they really want. So throughout the warm water periods, we fish this quite often. We fish it in cool water some too. If we get a little bit of rise in temperature and those fish are putting on the feed bag a little bit and the bite's picking up some, we'll tend to fish the Carolina rig. But you can also fish this in colder water conditions by really slowing it down. But it's all going to depend on where those fish are laying in the water column based on the temperatures. If you have something like a rattlesnaker, you can then put rattles into the worm itself. Now all of a sudden you have something that's clicking, something that's rattling, something that has a bunch of tail action, and you're kicking up sediment off the water's bottom. That's a recipe to elicit strikes. There seems to be a new rig coming out constantly, something from Japan, something from here, something from here. And while there's merits to those, sometimes the good old tried and trues are the best option you can use. The Carolina rig. Don't overlook this one. Fish it. We're going to start introducing some concepts like this to the channel more. Different fishing rigs, when to fish them, how to rig them, all that good stuff. While it does help beginners, it's not always going to be necessarily beginner based. We just want to give good sound information that can help you catch more fish. We thank you all so much for checking out our videos. Please subscribe, help the channel continue to grow so that we can get more out there and I can continue to produce these videos. If there's anything you want to see, anything you want to know, please drop a comment. Let us know and we'll certainly try to touch on it for you. So thank you all so much for checking out the video. Tight lines.